December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor's smoke still rising into the Pacific sky. In a cramped intelligence bunker 3,000 miles away, a Japanese cryptographer smiled as he decoded yet another intercepted American military transmission. The message revealed troop movements, supply routes, tactical plans. The everything Imperial Navy needed to maintain their devastating momentum across the Pacific. For months, Japanese codebreakers had been systematically unraveling American communications with surgical precision, turning every radio transmission into a window into Allied strategy. But somewhere in the Arizona desert, a middle-aged man named Philip Johnston was reading a newspaper article about Native American soldiers training with an armored division. His mind raced back to childhood memories of playing with Navajo children on a reservation, learning their complex tonal language that existed nowhere else on Earth. As he set down the paper, Johnston realized he might hold the key to something the Japanese military machine had never encountered. A language so intricate, so culturally specific, that it could become invisible to enemy ears. What Johnston didn't know was that across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence officers were already preparing for America's next move. They had studied English extensively, recruited linguists, developed sophisticated decryption methods. They believed they could crack any code the Americans might devise. They had calculated every variable except one. Some secrets aren't written in books or stored in machines. Some secrets live only in the voices of people who have guarded their words for centuries. And that was the moment the entire war shifted, though almost no one realized it at the time. This video examines published sources for educational purposes. Interpretations are attributed. No claims are asserted as fact without citation. The year 1942 marked a turning point in the Pacific War, but not for the reasons most history books emphasize. While American forces struggled to gain footing against Japanese expansion, a different kind of battle was being fought in the invisible realm of military communications. Japanese intelligence had achieved something remarkable and terrifying. They were winning the war of words before America could even speak. According to military historians, Japanese cryptographers had demonstrated exceptional skill at intercepting and deciphering Allied communications throughout the early Pacific campaign. Lieutenant General Seizo Arisue, Japan's chief of intelligence, would later confirm that his team successfully broke the codes used by the US Army and Army Air Corps with disturbing regularity. Every intercepted transmission became a tactical advantage. Every decoded message a glimpse into American intentions. Before we uncover today's secret from the pages of military history, if you enjoy exploring the hidden stories, decisive battles, and overlooked moments that shaped our world, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more untold wartime histories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always amazed how these memories of the past connect us across so many corners of the world. The crisis facing American communications in the Pacific was more severe than most commanders wanted to admit. Standard encryption methods were proving not only vulnerable to Japanese decryption, but also impractically implement under slow-to-combat conditions. While American forces needed to transmit tactical information in seconds, existing codes required minutes or even hours to encode and decode properly. In the fluid, fast-paced island warfare of the Pacific, such delays could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. Military records from early 1942 indicate that American radio operators had discovered something deeply unsettling. Japanese forces weren't just intercepting their communications. They were using that intercepted intelligence to anticipate American movements, counter Allied strategies, and even transmit false messages back to confuse American commanders. The enemy had achieved something approaching total communication superiority. Into this desperate situation stepped an unlikely figure whose childhood experiences would reshape the entire course of the Pacific War. Philip Johnston was born in Topeka, Kansas, in 1892. the son of missionary William Johnston. When Philip was 4 years old, his family moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where his father began serving Navajo communities on the western part of their reservation. What happened next would prove crucial to American victory decades later. Young Philip Johnston spent his formative years playing with Navajo children, absorbing their language naturally through daily interaction. The complexity of what he was learning would have astounded linguists. Navajo belongs to the Athabascan language family, characterized by intricate verb structures, tonal variations, and grammatical complexity that makes it virtually incomprehensible to outsiders without extensive training. According to linguistic research, Navajo possesses features that make it uniquely difficult to master. The language employs a three-way contrast between plain, aspirated, and ejective consonants. It relies heavily on verbal constructions rather than nouns, with every verb requiring specific prefixes arranged in precise order. Most significantly, for future military applications, Navajo had remained largely unwritten, existing primarily in the oral traditions of communities scattered across the American Southwest. In 1901, young Philip Johnston accompanied his father and Navajo leaders to Washington, D.C. for a historic meeting with President Theodore Roosevelt. The delegation sought to expand Navajo territory through executive order, and 9-year-old Philip served as translator between the tribal leaders and the President of the United States. This experience demonstrated not only his fluency in Navajo, but also his ability to bridge cultural and linguistic gaps under pressure. Johnston's path to military relevance began during World War I, when he served as a veteran and learned about the military's ongoing search for unbreakable communication methods. He discovered that Choctaw and other Native American languages had been used successfully for encoding messages during the Great War, but these earlier efforts had been limited in scope and application. The pivotal moment came in early 1942 when Johnston read a newspaper article about Native American soldiers participating in training exercises with an armored division in Louisiana. The article sparked a realization that would change the course of the Pacific War. Johnston understood that Navajo possessed characteristics that made it potentially perfect for military cryptography. Historical estimates suggest that fewer than 30 non-Navajo individuals could understand the language at the outbreak of World War II. Crucially, none of these individuals were Japanese. The language had developed in isolation within the American Southwest, with no significant contact with Asian linguistic traditions. Its complex grammar, tonal qualities, and numerous dialects created multiple layers of incomprehensibility for potential enemies. Johnston moved quickly to test his theory. He contacted 4 Navajo friends working in Los Angeles and asked them to help demonstrate how their language could serve as the foundation for an unbreakable military code. The demonstration they prepared would prove more successful than anyone anticipated. The test took place before Marine Corps officials who were initially skeptical about using a Native American language for military communications. However, Johnston's demonstration revealed capabilities that mechanical encryption systems couldn't match. Under simulated combat conditions, his Navajo volunteers could encode, transmit, and decode a 3-line English message in 20 seconds. Contemporary mechanical encryption systems require minutes the same task. General to perform 30. Clayton Vogel witnessed this demonstration and immediately grasped its strategic implications. The speed advantage alone would revolutionize battlefield communications, but the security benefits were even more significant. Here was a communication method that combined the speed of voice transmission with encryption that no enemy could break. Despite concerns about the security risks of using a Native American language for military communications, Marine Corps leadership decided to authorize a pilot project. They approved the recruitment of 30 Navajos and allowed Johnston to enlist as a staff sergeant to participate in the program he had conceived. In May 1942, the first 29 Navajo recruits arrived at Camp Elliott near San Diego for basic training. after completing standard Marine Corps preparation, they faced a unique challenge that would determine the success or failure of the entire program. These men needed to create a comprehensive military code using their native language. Chester Nez, one of the original Code Talkers, later described the moment they received their extraordinary assignment. A major brought them into a secure room and announced that they would need to develop a code in their own language. He then left them locked in the room to figure out how to accomplish this seemingly impossible task. The 28 men who remained in the program, one having dropped out during training, spent days developing what would become one of the most effective military codes in history. They created two distinct types of coding systems, each serving different operational needs. The first system, designated Type 1, established Navajo words to represent individual English letters. For example, the Navajo word for ant, WWII, represented the letter A. This system allowed Code Talkers to spell out any English word using Navajo animal names and other familiar terms. The second system proved even more innovative. The Code Talkers developed approximately 450 Navajo terms to represent frequently used military concepts that had no equivalent in their traditional language. Since Navajo had no word for submarine, they created the term iron fish, or besh lo. Fighter aircraft became hummingbird, or daheti high. These creative translations formed an intricate web of meaning that would prove impossible for enemies to decipher. The complexity of the final code system exceeded anything previously attempted in military communications. Code Talkers had to memorize more than 400 terms perfectly, with no written references allowed during operations. The security of the entire system depended on each individual's ability to recall precise translations under extreme combat stress. Testing revealed that the Navajo Code offered unprecedented advantages over existing communication methods. A skeptical Marine lieutenant decided to conduct rigorous trials before trusting Code Talkers with actual combat messages. The results exceeded all expectations. Code Talkers successfully translated, transmitted, and retranslated complex messages in 2.5 minutes. Without using the Navajo system, the same task required hours to complete safely. The success of these initial tests convinced Marine Corps leadership to expand the program dramatically. On July 20, 1942, commanders recommended recruiting an additional 200 Navajos as military communicators. The pilot project had proven that Native American languages could provide both speed and security advantages that mechanical systems couldn't match. What made the Navajo Code particularly effective wasn't simply the rarity of the language. Even Navajos, who weren't part of the Code Talker program, couldn't understand the military transmissions they heard. The code worked through systematic word association, where specific Navajo terms had been assigned to represent tactical concepts and military terminology. This double layer of encryption, linguistic and systematic, created an unbreakable communication method that would prove its worth across every major Pacific campaign. The stage was now set for the most comprehensive test of the Navajo Code system. American forces were preparing for their first major offensive operation against Japanese positions, and the Code Talkers would face their baptism of fire in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal. On August 7, 1942, 15 Navajo Marines waded through the surf at Red Beach, Guadalcanal, carrying equipment that would have seemed unremarkable to any observer. Standard military radio packs, field telephones, notebooks for recording coordinates. What the Japanese intelligence officers monitoring Allied communications couldn't have known was that these Marines possessed something more valuable than any mechanical encryption device. They carried centuries of linguistic evolution in their minds, a weapon forged not in factories but in the isolated mesas and canyons of the American Southwest. Within hours of the landing, the first coded transmissions began crackling across Japanese monitoring stations. Intelligence officers who had grown accustomed to methodically breaking American communications found themselves confronting something unprecedented. The intercepted voices spoke in patterns that defied every linguistic framework they possessed. Tonal variations that seemed to follow no European model. consonant combinations that appeared impossible to transcribe using any known alphabet. According to military historians studying Japanese intelligence records, enemy cryptographers initially assumed they were hearing a new mechanical encryption system transmitted over voice channels. The alternative, that American forces were using a completely unknown language, seemed too improbable to consider seriously. After all, Japanese linguists had spent years studying English, Spanish, and other European languages they expected to encounter in Pacific operations. The battle for Guadalcanal marked the operational debut of the Navajo Code Talker program. But the Marines using this revolutionary communication system faced challenges beyond enemy fire. They had to prove their worth not only to Japanese forces trying to intercept their messages, but also to American commanders who remained skeptical about relying on Native American languages for critical military communications. Private First Class Sidney Bodoni, one of the original Guadalcanal Code Talkers, later described the pressure they faced during those first combat operations. American officers monitored their transmissions carefully, comparing the speed and accuracy of Navajo communications with traditional encryption methods. Any failure, any delay, any misunderstood message could have ended the entire program before it truly began. The results spoke for themselves with devastating clarity. Code talkers could transmit complex tactical information in minutes, while traditional methods required hours. More importantly, Japanese forces showed no signs of understanding or responding to the intercepted Navajo transmissions. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, American communications were truly secure from enemy intelligence. Japanese attempts to decode the Navajo transmissions revealed the fundamental miscalculation in their intelligence preparation. According to post-war interrogations of captured Japanese cryptographers, enemy analysts initially focused on identifying mechanical patterns they expected to find in any military code. They searched for repeated sequences, mathematical relationships, and systematic substitutions that characterized European encryption methods. What they discovered instead challenged every assumption about military communications. The intercepted transmissions contained no apparent mechanical patterns. Voice analysis revealed consistent speakers using what appeared to be a natural language. But linguistic comparison with the known Native American languages yielded no meaningful results. Japanese intelligence possessed extensive files on Cherokee, Choctaw, and other tribal languages they had studied after World War I, but none matched the Guadalcanal intercepts. The sophistication of Japanese code-breaking efforts makes their failure to penetrate Navajo communications even more remarkable. Intelligence records indicate that Japan had sent teams of anthropologists and linguists to the United States during the interwar period specifically to study Native American languages and cultures. These researchers had anticipated that America might again employ indigenous languages for military communications, as had occurred during World War I. However, the scope of Native American linguistic diversity had proven overwhelming even for dedicated academic study. North America contained hundreds of distinct indigenous languages, many with multiple dialects and regional variations. The Japanese research teams had focused on larger, more widely known languages like Cherokee and Comanche, never penetrating the linguistic isolation of the Navajo Nation in the remote Southwest. The code talkers themselves understood the irony of their situation with profound clarity. Many had attended government-sponsored boarding schools designed to eliminate Native American languages and cultures. These institutions had punished students for speaking their traditional languages, insisting that assimilation required abandoning indigenous identity. Now the same government was asking them to use those forbidden languages to defend American interests against foreign enemies. Chester Nez, reflecting on this contradiction decades later, observed that the Code Talker program represented an unexpected validation of Native American cultural preservation. The very linguistic traditions that government policy had tried to erase now provided America with its most effective communication security in the Pacific War. The success at Guadalcanal convinced Marine Corps leadership to expand the Code Talker program dramatically. By late 1942, Recruitment efforts were identifying qualified Navajo candidates across the reservation system. However, finding suitable recruits presented unique challenges that reflected the complex relationship between Native American communities and federal military service. Many potential code talkers came from families with limited experience in mainstream American society. Reservation life had remained relatively isolated from the industrial mobilization transforming the rest of the country. Young Navajo men who had never seen an ocean were being asked to serve in amphibious operations across the Pacific. Those who had grown up herding sheep in high desert environments faced deployment to tropical islands where the climate, vegetation and terrain bore no resemblance to their homeland. Military records from 1943 indicate that Navajo recruits demonstrated exceptional adaptability during training. Their performance in basic military skills matched or exceeded that of recruits from other backgrounds. More importantly, their mastery of the specialized code talker requirements consistently impressed training instructors who had initially questioned whether the program could produce sufficient numbers of qualified operators. The complexity of code talker training extended far beyond basic military preparation. Each recruit had to achieve perfect memorization of the expanding military vocabulary that now included nearly 600 specialized terms. They practiced under simulated combat conditions, transmitting coded messages while subjected to loud noises, physical stress, and time pressure designed to replicate battlefield environments. Training exercises revealed additional advantages of the Navajo code system that hadn't been anticipated during initial development. Code talkers could maintain secure communications even when enemy forces captured American radio equipment. Since the security of the system depended on linguistic knowledge rather than mechanical devices, Japanese forces could intercept transmissions without gaining any intelligence value from the captured equipment. Furthermore, the code talkers developed remarkable speed and accuracy under pressure. Training records show that experienced operators could encode and transmit tactical information faster than trained radio operators using conventional methods. This speed advantage became crucial during rapid military operations, where communication delays could compromise mission success. As 1943 progressed, code talker operations expanded beyond simple message transmission to include complex coordination of combined arms operations. They began handling artillery fire direction and close air support coordination unit tactical communication that required precise terminology and split-second timing. The success of these expanded roles demonstrated that the Navajo code system could support the full spectrum of military operations. The Japanese military response to their continued communication failures provides insight into the psychological impact of the Code Talker program on enemy operations. Intelligence reports from captured documents suggest that Japanese commanders grew increasingly frustrated with their inability to anticipate American tactical moves. The communication advantage that had served them so well during early Pacific operations had completely reversed. Enemy forces began altering their own communication procedures in response to American operational security. Japanese units started using more complex codes, changing frequencies more frequently, and limiting radio transmissions to reduce their vulnerability to Allied intelligence gathering. These defensive measures imposed additional operational burdens on Japanese forces, while providing no corresponding advantages in understanding American intentions. By mid-1943, approximately 200 Navajo Code Talkers were serving with Marine units across the Pacific Theater. They had participated in operations at Bougainville, participated in the Gilbert Islands campaign, and were preparing for the massive Central Pacific offensive that would test their capabilities on a scale never before attempted. The stage was now set for the ultimate examination of Navajo Code effectiveness. American forces were planning simultaneous operations across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean, requiring coordination between multiple Marine divisions, naval task forces, and Army air units. The complexity of these operations would demand communication capabilities that could handle unprecedented volumes of tactical information while maintaining absolute security from Japanese intelligence. The Marshall Islands operation of February 1944 would demonstrate the Navajo Code system's capabilities on an unprecedented scale. For the first time, American forces planned simultaneous amphibious assaults across multiple atolls, requiring coordination between 3 separate Marine divisions, numerous naval task forces, and supporting Army air units. The complexity of managing such dispersed operations demanded communication capabilities that could handle massive volumes of tactical information while maintaining absolute security. Military historians note that the Japanese High Command had grown increasingly desperate to penetrate American communications by early 1944. Intelligence documents captured after the war reveal that enemy cryptographers had established dedicated units focused exclusively on solving what they termed the American voice cipher mystery. Teams of linguists worked around the clock analyzing intercepted transmissions, searching for any pattern that might unlock the secret of American communication security. According to interrogation records of captured Japanese intelligence officers, enemy analysts had developed several theories about American communication methods by 1944. Some believed the Americans were using a sophisticated mechanical encryption device that converted English into artificial sounds. Others suspected that captured Japanese soldiers were being forced to speak in code to confuse monitoring stations. None considered the possibility that American forces were employing a completely unknown natural language. The Japanese military's frustration with their communication intelligence failures began affecting their operational planning in measurable ways. Enemy commanders started making tactical decisions based on incomplete information, unable to predict American movements with the accuracy they had enjoyed during 1942. This intelligence blindness forced Japanese forces into increasingly reactive postures, responding to American initiatives rather than anticipating them. At Kwajalein Atoll, the largest of the Marshall Islands targets, 18 Navajo Code Talkers supported the 4th Marine Division's assault operations. These Marines faced their most challenging communication environment yet. The Coral Atoll's flat terrain provided no natural barriers against Japanese observation, meaning that any communication security breach could immediately compromise American tactical positions. Private First Class Carl Gorman, one of the Kwajalein Code Talkers, later described the intensity of their communication responsibilities during the 4-day battle. His team transmitted over 300 coded messages coordinating artillery strikes, close air support missions, and inter-unit movements. Every transmission had to be perfect, as any misunderstood message could result in friendly fire incidents or failed tactical coordination. The speed advantages of Navajo communications proved crucial during the rapid tempo of Marshall Islands operations. Traditional encryption methods would have created dangerous delays in coordinating the complex timing required for successful amphibious warfare. Code Talkers enabled American commanders to adjust their plans in real time, responding to changing battlefield conditions with unprecedented agility. Japanese defensive preparations in the Marshall Islands had anticipated American communication vulnerabilities that no longer existed. Enemy forces had positioned monitoring stations to intercept and analyze American transmissions, planning to use decoded intelligence for counterattacks against landing forces. Instead, Japanese intelligence officers found themselves listening to hours of incomprehensible Navajo conversations that provided no tactical value whatsoever. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders became apparent through prisoner interrogations conducted after the Marshall Islands fell. Captured officers described their growing sense of isolation as they realized they could no longer predict American tactical movements. The communication advantage that had sustained Japanese resistance during earlier campaigns had completely evaporated. Military records from the Marshall Islands operation show that code talkers had evolved beyond simple message transmission to become integral components of combined arms coordination. They were handling complex fire support requests, managing logistical coordination between ship-to-shore movements, and facilitating the intricate timing required for multi-division operations across dispersed island targets. The expansion of code talker responsibilities required additional training in specialized military terminology. By early 1944, the Navajo military vocabulary had grown to include over 600 terms, covering everything from naval gunfire procedures to close air support protocols. Each code talker had to maintain perfect memorization of this expanding lexicon while operating under extreme combat stress. The success of Marshall Islands operations convinced Marine Corps leadership that code talkers should participate in every major Pacific campaign. Planning began immediately for their deployment to the Mariana Islands, where American forces would face their most challenging amphibious operations yet attempted. The strategic importance of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian meant that communication security would be more critical than ever. Japanese intelligence made one final, desperate attempt to solve the Navajo Code mystery before the Mariana Islands campaign. According to declassified documents, enemy cryptographers recruited a Navajo prisoner of war who had been captured during the fall of the Philippines in 1942. This soldier, who had served with US Army forces at Bataan, was forced to listen to intercepted code talker transmissions in hopes of providing translation assistance. The experiment failed completely. The captured Navajo soldier, despite being fluent in his native language, could make no sense of the code talker transmissions he heard. The systematic word associations and military terminology created by the code talker program were completely foreign to anyone not specifically trained in their use. Even shared linguistic heritage provide in understanding their no-advantage messages. This code failure convinced Japanese intelligence from enemy beyond traditional military encryption. Reports that they crypt were dealing with something-graphic units began describing the American system as linguistically impenetrable and recommending that resources be redirected toward other intelligence-gathering methods. After nearly 2 years of intensive effort, Japanese codebreakers formally admitted defeat in their attempts to penetrate Navajo communications. The Mariana Islands campaign would test code talker capabilities under the most demanding conditions yet encountered. Saipan represented the first major assault on territory that Japan considered part of their inner defensive perimeter. Enemy resistance would be fierce, and the complexity of coordinating simultaneous operations across 3 major islands would push American communication systems to their absolute limits. On June 15, 1944, code talkers from multiple Marine divisions waded ashore at Saipan, carrying the weight of American strategic ambitions in the Pacific. The success of this operation would determine whether the United States could penetrate the heart of Japanese defensive positions. More immediately, it would test whether Navajo communications could maintain their effectiveness under the most intense combat conditions of the Pacific War. The Japanese garrison on Saipan had prepared for months to defend their positions, but their intelligence preparations suffered from the same communication blindness that had plagued enemy forces throughout 1943 and early 1944. Unable to intercept meaningful American tactical intelligence, Japanese commanders had to guess at American intentions and capabilities. This intelligence disadvantage would prove decisive in the coming battle. 21 Navajo Marines participated in the Saipan assault, their largest single operation deployment to date. These code talkers would coordinate operations involving over 70,000 American troops, hundreds of naval vessels, and thousands of aircraft. The scale of communication required exceeded anything previously attempted in amphibious warfare, demanding flawless execution of the Navajo code system under maximum stress. The battle for Saipan would ultimately demonstrate that American forces had achieved something unprecedented in military history. They had developed a communication system that provided both perfect security and maximum speed, enabling tactical coordination on a scale that their enemies could neither match nor comprehend. Visit to see the implications of Firasakan. would reshape the entire trajectory of the Pacific War. As American forces consolidated their positions on Saipan's beaches, Japanese intelligence officers monitoring Allied communications faced a sobering reality. After 2 years of intensive effort, they remained completely unable to understand American tactical transmissions. The linguistic weapon that had emerged from the American Southwest had proven more effective than any mechanical encryption device ever developed. The code talkers themselves understood that they had become more than military communicators. They were the guardians of a secret that could determine the outcome of the greatest military conflict in human history. Their voices carried not only tactical information, but the accumulated wisdom of centuries of Navajo linguistic evolution, now serving as America's most powerful weapon in the struggle for Pacific supremacy. The battle for Saipan revealed the true strategic value of communication superiority in modern warfare. As American forces advanced across the island's volcanic terrain, Japanese defenders found themselves fighting not just against superior firepower and numbers, but against an enemy who seemed to anticipate their every move. What enemy commanders didn't understand was that their communication intercepts, once their greatest intelligence asset, had become worthless fragments of an incomprehensible language. Samuel Holliday, a 19-year-old Navajo Marine from Monument Valley, exemplified the extraordinary burden these young men carried during the Saipan campaign. Holliday had nearly drowned during the initial landing when his assault boat overturned in heavy surf. Pulled unconscious from the water by fellow Marines, he resumed his communication duties the next morning, despite injuries from a Japanese artillery shell that had exploded nearby, throwing him through the air and burying him in sand. According to military historians studying the Saipan operation, the psychological pressure on code talkers extended beyond normal combat stress. These Marines understood that American tactical success depended entirely on their ability to maintain flawless communication under conditions designed to break human concentration. Any mistake in translation, any failure to transmit coordinates accurately, could result in friendly fire incidents or failed mission coordination. The complexity of Saipan operations pushed Navajo communications to unprecedented levels of sophistication. Code talkers were simultaneously coordinating naval gunfire from offshore battleships, directing close air support from carrier-based aircraft, and managing inter-unit movements across terrain that changed hourly as American forces advanced inland. Each type of communication required specialized military terminology that had been systematically developed over 2 years of program evolution. Japanese intelligence officers monitoring American communications during Saipan reported their complete inability to extract any tactical value from intercepted transmissions. According to captured enemy documents studied after the war, Japanese analysts had concluded that American forces were employing some form of artificial language system that bore no relationship to any known linguistic patterns. The irony of this assessment reflects the fundamental miscalculation underlying Japanese intelligence failure. What enemy cryptographers described as artificial was actually one of the most natural forms of human communication imaginable. Navajo had evolved over centuries in the isolated high desert of the American Southwest, developing linguistic complexity that reflected the sophisticated cultural traditions of its speakers. By July 1944, as American forces secured Saipan after nearly a month of brutal fighting, the strategic implications of communication superiority had become clear to military commanders on both sides. General Curtis LeMay, observing the efficiency of Navajo communications during planning sessions for future operations, noted that American forces could now coordinate complex multi-division operations with a speed and security that would have been impossible using traditional methods. The success at Saipan convinced Marine Corps leadership to expand code talker participation for the upcoming assault on Guam, where American forces would attempt to recapture the first US territory seized by Japanese forces after Pearl Harbor. The symbolic importance of this operation meant that communication security would be more critical than ever. 17 Navajo Marines participated in the Guam landings on July 21, 1944, supporting operations by both the 3rd Marine Division and the 77th Infantry Division. This marked the first time that Code Talkers had coordinated communications between Marine and Army units, requiring additional training in inter-service terminology and operational procedures. Private First Class John Benally, one of the Guam Code Talkers, later described the emotional weight of participating in the liberation of American territory. The knowledge that they were helping to reclaim land seized by enemy forces added personal significance to their professional responsibilities. These young Navajo Marines understood that their linguistic heritage was directly contributing to the restoration of American sovereignty in the Pacific. The Guam operation demonstrated another crucial advantage of the Navajo communication system. Unlike mechanical encryption devices, which could be captured and potentially compromised if enemy forces overran American positions, the security of Navajo communications remained intact, regardless of battlefield conditions. Code Talkers carried their encryption capabilities in their minds, making them immune to traditional forms of intelligence compromise. Japanese forces defending Guam had prepared extensively for American assault operations, but their defensive planning suffered from the same communication intelligence deficits that had plagued enemy operations throughout 1943 and 1944. Unable to intercept meaningful American tactical information, Japanese commanders had to rely on visual observation and tactical intelligence analysis. The recapture of Guam after intuition, rather than systematic 26 days of fighting, marked another decisive victory for American forces. But the strategic significance extended beyond territorial recovery. Military historians note that the speed and efficiency of American operations in the Marianas demonstrated a level of tactical coordination that Japanese forces could no longer match or counter effectively. As American attention turned toward the next major objective in the Central Pacific advance, Code Talkers prepared for what would become their most famous and challenging operation. The assault on Iwo Jima would test every aspect of their training, experience, and psychological endurance under conditions that would push human communication capabilities to their absolute limits. The small volcanic island of Iwo Jima represented the ultimate test of Japanese defensive determination. Located only 750 miles from the Japanese mainland, the island had been transformed into a fortress complex of underground tunnels, reinforced bunkers, and interlocking defensive positions designed to inflict maximum casualties on attacking American forces. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese forces had spent months preparing for the anticipated American assault, creating defensive positions that could withstand sustained bombardment while maintaining the ability to deliver devastating fire against landing forces. The complexity of coordinating American operations against such fortified positions would require communication capabilities of unprecedented precision and reliability. 6 Navajo Code Talkers were assigned to support the 5th Marine Division during the Iwo Jima operation, a relatively small number that reflected the concentrated nature of the assault on the 8-square-mile island. However, the intensity of communication requirements would exceed anything previously experienced in Pacific operations. On February 19, 1945, as Marines stormed the black volcanic beaches of Iwo Jima, Major Howard Connor watched 6 young Navajo men establish communication positions under the heaviest enemy fire of the Pacific War. Over the next 36 hours, these Code Talkers would transmit over 800 messages without a single error, coordinating the most complex amphibious operation in military history. Connor later declared that without the Navajo Marines, the island would never have fallen. The legacy of the Code Talkers extends far beyond their wartime service. According to military historians, their success fundamentally changed how modern armed forces approach communication security. The program proved that cultural preservation and national defense could strengthen each other in ways no strategist had imagined. Perhaps most remarkably, the very language that government boarding schools had once tried to eliminate became America's most powerful weapon in the Pacific. The Code Talkers transformed a history of cultural suppression into a story of redemption, proving that diversity represented strength rather than weakness in the struggle for freedom. Today, the Navajo Code remains the only military encryption system in modern warfare that was never broken by enemy forces. Their voices, carrying the wisdom of centuries across the static of combat radios, help secure victory in humanity's greatest conflict. We honor the memory of these remarkable Marines and their contribution to our shared history. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful weapons are not forged in factories, but preserved in the hearts and minds of those who refuse to let their heritage fade into silence.